Welcome back to the Destination Gettysburg podcast. I'm Rick Kennis, being joined today by the new superintendent of the Gettysburg National Military Park and Eisenhower National Historic Site, Kristina Heister. How are you today?
I'm great, Rick. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a long road, you coming to this position, but you've been in Pennsylvania for a very long time. You've been the deputy superintendent did you come along in 2020? Is that correct?
2020.
Okay.
Just before COVID.
Gotcha. And then just about 4 years later, here you are as the first woman superintendent.
Yes.
Incredible.
It's exciting.
What was that road like bringing you here?
Well, I've been around a long time, not only in Pennsylvania, but in the National Park Service. So I've been with the National Park Service for about 32 years. About half that time has been in historical parks like Valley Forge, Appomattox Courthouse, and here at Gettysburg and Eisenhower. I also took a short tour out west for about 6 years in the Mojave and Great Basin deserts.
Whoa.
I spent about 2 years in the Northeast Regional Office as the Chief of Natural Resources for the entire Northeast region. Before coming to Gettysburg, directly before, I spent 6 years as the Superintendent of Upper Delaware and Scenic and Recreational River. And then got here in 2020, deputy for 4 years, and now superintendent. And, you know, I'm fond of saying you spend the first half of your life trying to get away from your parents, and you spend the second half of your life trying to get back to your parents. And so, you know, I'm here largely because my mom and dad are in Lebanon. When I got here, my dad was in his late 80s. He had dementia. He passed in 2022.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My mom is now 90, and so I'm only an hour from her. I'm there at least every other weekend, sometimes more. And, you know, it's the honor of my life to be able to care for them and now care for her as, you know, she gets older.
That's incredible. It's very fortunate that you're about an hour away, you say.
Yeah.
So that definitely helps, I'm sure. But yeah, you take care of a lot of things, whether it's family or the parks.
Yeah.
There's a lot that people might not realize that you do in your position with your role within national parks and how it relates to Gettysburg. If you could, please tell me, not necessarily the day-to-day question, but like on a general basis, it's not just a ceremonial role. You do a lot to make sure that the visitors are getting a good experience, whether they're coming here for their first time or they've been here before. And that relates a lot to what we'll talk about a little bit later with Little Round Top. But namely, just keeping those experiences going for future generations. What does that look like for you on a regular basis?
A lot of meetings. So, you know, the mission of the National Park Service is to preserve resources and values for future generations, not only for this one. You know, we are in the forever business. I bring a wealth of experience. You know, I'm not a historian, but I bring a wealth of experience in resource protection, in visitor experience. I understand law, regulation, policy, personnel, team building, relationships with communities, things that we hope all of our superintendents in the National Park Service have. But overall, you know, I want to be an advocate for our most important resources, our staff, our incredible historic and natural resources, our visitors, and our community.
And a lot of that took place, a lot of that had to be paid attention to with the rehabilitation project for Little Round Top. For years, that's probably been on your friends that you've been working with, all your coworkers' wish list for rehabilitation projects, because it's faced probably as, if not the most popular location on the parks battlefield here. It has faced a lot of foot traffic, a lot of vehicle traffic. There's been erosion. There's been accessibility issues. Namely, that's what I'm most excited about this project from day one. When I heard about it, getting the green light, so to speak, with funding, I was so excited because one of the big things that was talked about from day one was increasing accessibility. Because for decades, people have been visiting this part of the battlefield, but a lot of them might not have been able to see parts of it because you can't get into certain areas, prior to today. That $13 million project that just finished up after about just shy of 2 years was an incredible feat. How did you plan that out? How did you and your colleagues plan that out?
So, the planning process for the Little Round Top rehabilitation started over a decade ago. Our mission is not only preserving resources and values, but it's also providing those resources for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of the American public. So if you're going to have a mandate that includes both preservation and use, then you better be thinking about management, maintenance, sustainability, rehabilitation. Today, visitation in the park is over 900,000 people a year. The vast majority of those people go to Little Round Top. And so trails, fences, buildings, stone walls, they don't last forever. When 900,000 people a year are walking on them, climbing over them, touching them, and when Mother Nature is doing what she does. So a large portion of that decades-long process involved raising money. $13 million doesn't grow on trees.
Nope.
And so, this project was able to come to fruition with the help of our partners. So that's the Gettysburg Foundation, the American Battlefield Trust, and the National Park Foundation, who contributed about 50% of that funding. And then, of course, there is a long process by which you design the project. And I can tell you that implementing that design, was a gigantic challenge. You look at something, take accessibility, right? And so about a third, so we've doubled the number of trails up there from about 1 mile of trails to 2 miles of trails. A third of those are handicap accessible. We had wanted many more to be accessible. But when you think about the fact that you're on top of a big hill, right, and then you look at a plan and on paper, and then you look at that on the ground, and then suddenly you realize the amount of soil that you're going to have to place on that original landscape, where the topography is so important, is, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, that's going to have a huge impact. And so the whole construction project was a process in, okay, this is what's on the paper, this is what it's going to look like on the ground, and then saying, nope, we're not going to do that, let's redesign this portion. And so I think in the end, we ended up with something that is going to be accessible, that is going to protect the resources that are present on Little Round Top for generations to come, and is going to be safe for visitors to go up there. All the feedback that we've gotten, except maybe for parking, has been tremendously positive. So especially, we've got a new trail that comes up from Warren Avenue. Some people call it the Confederate Attack Trail. Some people call it the Texas Trail. That's been really popular, amazingly enough, because it's quite steep.
Yes, I took up I didn't realize what I was going up to when I just walked up to, well, let me just go up this like it's no thing. It's apparently like 9 stories or so.
Well, I've been calling it one of our tactile experiences because your legs burn so bad
Yes.
when you're hiking up there. And then certainly it's not only accessible for those with mobility issues, but every single monument that's up there is now accessible, although maybe not, in a wheelchair.
Sure.
So the Minnesota Sharpshooters Monument, getting to that monument in the past was, scrambling over, shrubbery and all kinds of stuff. And there's now a beautiful trail to that. There are 4 handicap accessible spots, so that's twice the number that we had before. There are designated bus parking spots, which there weren't really
Right.
before.
Didn't exist, right?
And
yeah.
so a lot of mobility challenged folks are able to get off the bus, onto the concrete accessible pathway, cross onto concrete accessible trails, and get to at least a significant portion of the top of the hill, as well as down to the 20th Main.
Amazing. And I was going to, quote unquote, come to defense earlier when you were saying that, one of the biggest complaints might be about parking. But there's actually a lot of thought has been put into that parking. Like you mentioned, the bus parking now have designated areas.
Yes.
Hopefully people will follow those signs and respect those signs, because that does help a lot of that traffic. When you were talking about the paths, I forget the different titles for the paths, but as my understanding is, there's a lot of, I don't want to say acceptance of the fact that people make trails as they visit year to year, but there's a type of trail that you have created that is basically accepting of the fact that people like to go this way or that way. So you've made quote unquote official trails out of those experiences.
Yes, part of the planning process was trying to understand, by looking at what was on the ground, what the visitor was trying to tell us about where they wanted to go. So the trails are the trails.
Right.
But as I said, there are twice the number of trails up there as there were before. The reason for that is because we looked at all the social trails that people had created. And for many of those social trails, we formalized them because they were trying to get somewhere that was important to get. There are some social trails that are no longer there. And there's a reason for that, whether it be an area that was archaeologically sensitive or an area that was particularly prone to erosion. And so we are asking visitors to stay on the trails that we have created for them that hopefully reflect, historic use of that site moving into the future. It is important for the public to help us to sustain that huge investment that we have made in the Little Round Top.
And part
area.
of that was vegetation.
It was.
With the trails that you created, in particular, I think about the accessibility trail and so path and so forth. Trees had to come down.
They did.
But then trees were planted.
They were.
And you did it in such a beautiful way, not to toot y'all's horn, but you did it in such a nice way that when you're looking up from Devil's Den, you don't see the paths because the trees were replanted and done so in a way that it looks as natural as possible.
Yep, and that's always one of our goals. I'll also say, we did reconstruct the stone walls that were
Okay.
there. So there have been some questions about that. Do they look like they did during the battle in 1863? And the answer to that is mostly, but not quite. I
Okay.
think part of the story that's maybe lesser known is that after the battle, probably July 3rd,
Okay.
right, the Union soldiers didn't know the battle was over. So after the 2nd, right, they spent time on the 3rd, into the night of the 3rd, rebuilding those fortifications. And so what you see up there today reflects that effort, what it would have looked like when the Union Army left the hill.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. And it's again, time and time again, it's one of those things where, you have to be here to really grasp that mentality, to just stand here and close your eyes and take it all in. Books are great. There's no shortage of books on the topic. But yeah, it's just incredible. And near the Little Round Top, just down the way there a little bit, you have some new guests that have come around. They have made themselves known. They are a topic amongst people in the area, people who come time and time again, talking, of course, about the beavers. They have made their own little ecosystem down there. But you have you have your approach, you have your standoff approach for the most part. Please tell us about the beavers that have moved into the area and how they have made it their home.
So, when people talk to me about this, I usually start off by asking them if they're Team Beaver or Team Beaver Hat.
Okay.
So which are you?
I'm Team Beaver.
Oh, you're Team Beaver. All right.
I like them. I like
It's a
them as long as
friendly
they
audience,
don't start flooding the roadways. I'm fine.
Okay. So, the presence of beavers in Plum Run is not new. They have been there off and on for many years. Usually it's a year or two, before they move on. We're now going on at least year 3. And so there are more lodges, there are more dams. The extent of ponding, kind of goes up and down with rainfall. But they're a native species to Pennsylvania. And although they were once abundant throughout Pennsylvania and the East Coast, they were completely eliminated from the state by the late 1800s due to trapping and changes in habitat. So now, of course, they've returned. They've repopulated most of their former range, and they are most noticeable at Plum Run, but they actually occur throughout almost all the waterways in the park.
Okay.
So when people ask me the question whether I'm Team Beaver,
That was actually the
Because-
first time I've ever actually been asked that question. It's okay.
given my background, they assume I'm Team Beaver.
Uh-huh.
My answer to that is that, I'm Team National Park Service.
There you go.
And I say that because everything we're doing with the beavers is being done consistent with law, regulation, National Park Service policy. In parks, our strategy overall is to try to integrate the management of natural and cultural resources, recognizing at the same time that they have their separate needs. And so, kind of in other words, battlefields preserve more than history.
Right.
And parks like Yellowstone preserve more than nature. So what is that balance, and how do we achieve that? So in this case, the presence of beavers and their activities is a natural process, which the Park Service doesn't really mess around with
Right.
unless there's a really good reason to do so. And when we do that, our actions are the minimum necessary to achieve our goal. So the Plum Run Corridor is our most ecologically diverse. It has the highest water quality, special plant communities, rare animal species, and at the same time, as we hear over and over again, it is also really culturally important. So what are those features that are considered contributing to that cultural landscape. So things like the open nature of the landscape, the monumentation, Plum Run itself. In addition to that, we need to ensure access to those features.
Right.
So, you know, it's important to remember that Plum Run was a wetland in 1863. It is still a wetland. It's important to remember that it was considered an obstacle to troop movements.
Okay.
It is still that today. So I brought this cool quote that I like. So this is a quote from a line officer in the 98th Pennsylvania Infantry.
Okay.
And he wrote, "We charged through the marsh of Plum Run, advancing to the foot of the ridge on the west side of the swamp. We, however, received a livelier fire from the left," that's Devil's Den, "while crossing the swamp, which, together with the difficulty of crossing through the soft slough, had the effect to break our line up somewhat, so that the halt at the foot of the ridge, though for a few minutes only, allowed those who became delayed, stuck in the mire, in crossing, to catch up." So, you know, a lot of people say a wetland shouldn't be there. Some call it a swamp. Well, it was a swamp.
You got a quote right there that.
Yep. And I
Brings
think,
it
you know, and people also don't understand that in addition to Park Service policy, parks have guiding documents that reflect the resources of the park and how those should be managed. For us at Little Round Top, which includes Plum Run, you know, that's what we call a cultural landscape report. It describes what's important and makes recommendations on how we're going to manage that. So in this case, the CLR for that area recommends managing the Plum Run corridor to promote species diversity,
Excellent. And
Right?
there is definitely diversity.
while continuing to manage the vegetation so that it doesn't block the key views of Little Round Top. So, you know, does it look different than it did in 1863? Yes, it does. Can the visitors still interpret it as an obstacle to troop movements? Yes. Is Plum Run still there? Yes, it is. It's just under a little bit more water. Is the landscape open and the view to Little Round Top as clear as it was in 1863? No, but it's much more open than it was in 2022 because the beavers are working very hard to keep it open. Are the monuments still visible and accessible? Yes, they are. You know, and just to finish this up, you know, to bring that back full circle, to it's kind of where we started, you know, we are monitoring the potential impacts of the beavers on all the cultural resources in the area. When the ponding, right, that they created, when they had so many dams up that we started to get water around the 40th New York Infantry Monument, we took appropriate action. We installed things called beaver deceivers,
Okay.
right? And those beaver deceivers de-watered that area around the monument. So now we're able to mow the trail around that monument. People are able to access that monument. And that was the minimum action necessary to achieve that goal. So moving forward, we are going to continue to monitor the resources and take appropriate action.
Wonderful. And those changes that people might see to the area have all been natural, as you pointed out. I mean, it's not like there's now a McDonald's at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
You know, it's things that would have happened naturally, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I would invite people, you know, on a spring evening to go down there to sit on one of those big rocks right by the swamp. And it is an amazing, amazing experience. The quiet or the deafening sound of frogs. And I just think it is a beautiful way to contemplate what happened in that space.
Amazing. Well, if you want a unique experience, you can do that, but then also kind of a segue, if you will, you have a leasing program with the parks that people can take on a whole new level of experience. What exactly is the leasing program?
This is so exciting.
It is exciting.
It is.
When it was announced, it was very exciting.
So in May of this year, we initiated a 3-year pilot program to make 2 of the historic homes on the battlefield available to the public as Airbnb-style rentals. That is the Bushman and the Slider farmhouses, homes that witnessed the Battle of Gettysburg. So this program not only offers a unique and immersive experience for the visitor, but all the fees associated with the rental go back to and are required to go back into the care of historic structures on the battlefield. So it's an innovative way to try to improve the care and sustainability of these critically important resources. And, if you can imagine sitting in your Adirondack chair on the backside of the Bushman farmhouse, looking out at Big Round Top and Little Round Top, and imagining that on July 2nd, as many as 7,000 Confederate troops under General Hood's division moved through that property on their way to assault the Union position at Devil's Den, Little Round Top, the wheat field, and that General Hood himself was seriously injured, in the Bushman orchard. And then you think about the fact that those troops then moved down through the Slider property, where they encountered the 2nd United States sharpshooters, and a fierce battle ensued right there. At the end of July 2nd, the defeated Confederates from Alabama, Arkansas, Texas retreated back to the Slider farm and encamped there overnight amongst all those buildings on the property. They stayed there till the afternoon of July 3rd, when General Farnsworth's cavalry attacked them and ultimately pushed them back to the Emmitsburg Road. And then finally on the 4th, the Union cavalry moved on to the property and incorporated that into their picket line. Again, not knowing whether or not the battle would continue. So I also brought a quote from one of our residents, which kind of reflects.
I love residential quotes. That's great.
Which kind of reflects, the experience. And this person said, "This was a dream come true for me to stay here. The house was in spectacular condition and very cozy. I was able to imagine the battle that took place here. It was an amazing experience, and I look forward to repeating it in the future." So, this is exactly, what we were looking to provide.
And if you saw my eyes closing, I wasn't falling asleep. I was just kind of putting myself in the mindset of the person telling you that. That's incredible. How can what's the easiest way for people to find information on the leasing program?
So you can go to our website.
Okay.
But all this information and all reservations are taken through a website that is www.recreation.gov.
Okay, excellent. And of course, we'll put that in the show notes later, so you don't have to remember it from what.
And you can currently book up to April 30th, 2025.
Wow, okay. Is there anything else before we wrap up today, if you will? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that's near and dear?
So I thought maybe you mentioned at the beginning of the show.
Yes.
That I'm a lifelong Pennsylvanian.
Yes.
And,
please tell us about your stories there.
Talking about the American public and the volunteer program reminds me how much I appreciate how the public sees the battlefield. And that's, I'm a park manager. I've managed lots of parks. But for the first time at Gettysburg, and I don't know why I didn't investigate this earlier, I'm looking at it through new eyes. And that's because when I knew I was going to become the superintendent, I said to myself, oh my God, surely. My family's been here since the early 1700s. 3 brothers came over from Germany, Berks County, Reading. I said, surely I must have an ancestor, right, that fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. And so, I started looking, and it's really a rabbit hole. It gets to be so fascinating, and there's so much information out there. So I did actually discover that I have lots of connections to the Civil War. So I actually have 2 ancestors that fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. So one was Cyrus Heister. Okay. He joined in 1862 as a musician. Okay. He was here at Gettysburg with the 93rd Regiment of the Pennsylvania Infantry near Little Round Top, Munchower Hill. And he deserted on May 12th of 1864 after he'd been through the Battle of the Wilderness. And May 12th, interestingly, was during the battle at Spotsylvania, when there was a bloody battle for the mule shoe. So his name does not appear on the Pennsylvania Memorial because individuals that deserted did not get their names on the Pennsylvania Memorial. But that's in contrast to Washington Heister, who was a sergeant with the 151st Regiment of the Pennsylvania Infantry. He fought on day 1 around Herbst Woods and the seminary, and then on day 3 helped repulse Pickett's charge. So that regiment had a casualty rate of 75%, which is really terrifying. And after the war, they were called the School Teachers Regiment because there were so many school teachers.
Okay.
Now, he did survive. His name, he had 10 kids after that. His name does appear on the Pennsylvania Memorial, although it is misspelled.
Okay.
So I can commiserate with all the people that contact me to say their ancestor's name is misspelled. And it turns out I have a whole bunch of other connections. So some of my favorite are a young 18-year-old Daniel Heister, mustered into the 101st Regiment of the Pennsylvania Infantry late in the war. So March of 1864. And, in April, a month later, the whole regiment was captured at Plymouth, North Carolina. And the enlisted men were sent to Andersonville. And so if you know anything about Andersonville, that was just a horrendous experience, and half the men that went in there did not come out. Fortunately, he was one that did come out. He mustered out in June of 1865, and we actually have his rifle, his musket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's cool. And then Dr. Joseph Heister, I love this one. So he arrived in Gettysburg on July 25th.
Okay.
So he was not at the Battle of Gettysburg. And he cared for a soldier by the name of H.W. Friedley. And he had been grievously injured in the leg. I think it was somewhere around Ayers Avenue. Okay. So somewhere around Little Round Top on the second day of the battle. And he was, when Dr. Heister came to care for him, on the floor of the Wills House parlor, which is now owned by the National Park Service.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't really know what the exact why he would come from Berks County to Gettysburg to take care of this young man, but they had some kind of relationship. There are a whole series of letters between Friedley and Dr. Heister and Dr. Heister's daughter, Maria. So I think they might have grown up in Norristown together and were family friends. Maybe there was some other relationship, but neither one of them ever married, Friedley or Maria. So that's really cool. And then the last one, I won't bore you with all this, but clearly it's fun to talk about.
It is very interesting to hear, yes.
But William Heister was appointed by Governor Curtin in 1863 as a mustering office in Harrisburg. And over the next year, he mustered 8 regiments of volunteers into service who had answered the governor's call for 60,000 men to repel the rebel invasion. And those regiments were assembled in the fairgrounds at the head of Penn Street in Harrisburg. And that encampment was called Camp Heister.
I tell you what.
There's lots more. I'm just getting started. I got 5 minutes about every 3 months to go down the rabbit hole. But those are just some fun stories.
the amount of times I had goosebumps coming up on my arm probably would have been up there in the double digits. That was incredible, just hearing those stories of how you've personally been connected to
like
our
gives you a
history.
whole different perspective on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's incredible. And yes, there are a great deal of rabbit holes you could fall down. I mean, on any topic anyway, but especially this topic. Well, thank you so much for joining us here
You're
today.
welcome. It's my pleasure.
Welcome you back anytime to chat about this, that, or the other thing. But I'm really looking forward to what you bring us over the next several years.
Thank you. Me too. It's a
because-
beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful park.
It's beautiful, and with all the traffic, foot traffic otherwise, it needs a lot of tender loving care, and you and your comrades really do a great job at protecting that.
Thank you. I have
So
a
thank you.
wonderful staff.
Excellent. Well, we'll see you around the bend.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Destination Gettysburg podcast, produced and hosted by Rick Kennis, with thanks to our special guest. No part of this material may be reproduced without written permission. Get inspired for your visit to Adams County, Pennsylvania at destinationgettysburg.com.